Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Charity Village webinar. We're going to get started in just a moment as we want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to join on the call before we kick things off. So just bear with us for just a moment here while all of our sector colleagues get a chance to get online here. Great, so I think we'll go ahead and just get started. So hello, welcome to those that are just joining. My name is Marina Dawson and I'm the Manager of Community and Content with Charity Village. Again, I'd like to welcome you all to today's Charity Village webinar. And before we dive right into the presentation today, I am just going to quickly run through a few housekeeping items for you. Now, today we are doing an Ask Me Anything session, and you will recall that we encouraged you to come prepared with your questions, but you may have also noticed that when you joined the webinar today, you were automatically put on mute. Now, we do this in order to minimize the amount of background noise that you're going to hear on today's webinar, but we are welcoming all of your questions, and we encourage you to submit them throughout the session today. Please submit them as you think of them, and you can do this and also make comments using the question box at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel. So please look for that at the right of your screen. You can also email any questions or comments to webinars@charityvillage.com. And we're also happy to take questions on Twitter as well. So just please tag us at Charity Village and use the hashtag CVWebinar. And I'll pop that in the question box, the chat box for you momentarily. If you do happen to encounter any technical issues today with the webinar, that could be viewing the presentation or with the audio, we ask that you also let us know in that question box or by sending us an email. And we'll do our best to get any technical difficulties resolved as quickly as we can. But just remember, in a worst case scenario, we are recording today's webinar and you will get the full recording by email. That will most likely be this afternoon or by tomorrow morning. So if you get called away or disconnected for any reason, you are still going to be able to view the full presentation afterwards. Finally, I wanted to thank everyone for your participation in today's session. We are doing things a little differently with this one, and we did ask you all to help us design the content by filling out the pre-webinar survey, and I can say you did not disappoint. We have had so many wonderful questions come in through the survey. We do expect many more to come up during the live webinar today. We do usually keep our sessions to just 1 hour. We may run overtime on this one if need be. Just remember that we're recording everything. So you can always go back, catch up on what you missed if you do need to leave at the top of the hour. It's unlikely that we're going to be able to answer every single question that gets asked today, but please rest assured we've got some excellent resources for you to find additional information if you're looking for more answers when the webinar is over. Now we should go ahead and get things started. So we're really happy to be hosting Lianne Picot for another webinar here today. Lianne, you've presented many times for us before, and we're so glad to have you back.
Thanks, Marina. I am so glad to be here, and I'm also just wanted to say I'm just so super excited about this one because it's one of my favorite topics, talking about the next generation of leadership. And I just want to let you all know that I just realized on my slide I've got children. And so some of you may be thinking, does she mean the next generation, meaning the children? No. So I apologize for that if you're experiencing a disconnect with the slide that I've put up. So anyway, just wanted to say welcome to you. And we're going to get started. Oh, I'm just need to get my slide going. Okay, so we're going to make some introductions. And what I'd love for you to do is to put your name, your first name in the chat, in the question box, rather, just to say we're in the question box, not the chat box. So just to let you know, that's where you want to put in your responses. So if you could add your name, and if you want to say where you work, go for it. And also tell us if you're a new, aspiring, or current leader. We'd love to hear from you about that. So while you do that, I want to talk to you about expectations for this session. As Marina said, we had a lot of questions. We actually had over 250 questions. So don't worry, we're not staying here for, until dinner time answering them all. But what I have done is kind of tried to group them into themes so that you are able to get high-level information from me in terms of the questions, but also so that it's a webinar that has content for you. So we're going to cover themes like, what does it mean to be a nonprofit leader, key competencies, things like that. How do I become a leader? Looking at the education, the training, on-the-job learning. what to do if you have no one to teach you, sadly a common theme in the questions. And when you become a nonprofit leader, what happens then? What about the workload, inspiring, motivating staff, inclusion? And then we're also going to cover a little bit on planning for the future. Just to let you know, we will not be covering boards and board relationships today. So tempted, there are a lot of questions about it, but the reason why is because it is such a big topic. And I'm just going to tell you right now, there is no silver bullet that will help you work with a board. They are all different. They change over time within your organization. And so there's a lot more to that topic. And Marina is going to put a link in the question box, I think, and or we'll also send it out afterwards for a really great podcast that actually dives into relationships with boards. So I apologize if you're disappointed that we're not going to talk about that today, but here's what I wanted to focus on today. We want to focus on you as a leader. We don't give enough space to leadership just in general, rather than focusing on the technical aspects. So we're focusing on what it means to be a leader overall. So you will also get a list of resources in your email afterwards. You'll get some resources that you can follow up on in terms of programs you might want to look into, some good resources at CharityVillage, as well as some resources to keep yourself updated about the sector. And then you'll also get some information about a Ryerson certificate related to voluntary sector, nonprofit and voluntary sector management. I teach at Ryerson, so just to be transparent, I'm totally plugging the program, and because it's awesome. But there are lots of programs nationally that you can kind of look into, and I sent a link for you. There's also information about an online leadership program that I developed specifically for you, for people like yourself who are trying to manage the leap into leadership, either to get there or having just got there, looking around trying to figure out what the heck to do. And then I also am giving you a little gift, which is my ebook. So it's specifically for new and aspiring leaders, and it's a bunch of stories and things about me starting out. So hope you enjoyed that. Okay, so if you've brought a question, hold on to it, as Marina said, or you can share it now, but you also might want to just hang on to it and see if what you want to ask about is getting covered. And then at the end of the content, we may go an hour with the content depending, but let's see, we might not. But if we do go an hour with the content, we're staying open for questions. So hopefully you can hang around. But if not, leave your question in the question box, and Marina will share it with me so that we can kind of address it, and you'll get the recording and it'll get answered. So thank you so much for trying out this Ask Me Anything. It's a brand new model for CharityVillage and for me, so we're going to give it a go. Okay, so first thing I'm going to ask you to do, oh, no, let me introduce me. Sorry, there's me. You want to know who's talking. Some of you might have been on a webinar with me before, but some of you may not. So I've spent a lot of years in the sector in UK, Ireland, and Canada. It's funny because I look at the 25 years and I realize my math is not so good, and I may need to up that a little bit. When you write something down about your bio and then a few years later you're like, maybe I'm not showing my age here. But anyway, there you go. So I am a certified executive coach. I teach at Ryerson. I ran a nonprofit leadership center. I also had a international radio show about storytelling, which was very cool. I got to talk to some amazing people. If you check out my website at the end or at some point, you can get access to those shows. Super good stuff. And then now I spend my time helping leaders, and really I spend my time helping them to be inspiring, because I fundamentally believe that is what's missing in leadership, and we'll talk a little bit about the business case for that in a bit. So yeah, and I just thought I'd share a little tidbit that when I was working in the UK for a long time, I got invited to a party with the Queen. So yeah, my British grandmother was super proud. But that's just my list of things that I've done. I really want to share with you the story of, we had a first question, we had a first question, which is, what is one area that you struggled with when starting in a leadership position? I'm going to tell you that we had a lot of comments about the fact that people don't share their failures or their challenges in the sector. A lot of leaders don't share that. So we're going to start with that. And it's really important for new leaders to get a sense of the things that we experienced leaders have struggled with too, so that they know that they don't have to be perfect. I really do. It's frustrating to me that we somehow think that nonprofit leaders should, I think we go into some kind of, the phone booth and come out, with a cape on, or we get sent an owl and a magic wand in the night. And so all of a sudden we're a fabulous leader. We actually have to learn it. So when I was 31, I became an ED, and then I was a CEO at 35. I was quite young, and I was a CEO of a national organization in the UK. And I will tell you, the area I struggled with most was being taken seriously. And this sometimes may be quite reactive. I don't know that you remember, some of you are already young, but for me, what happened is I was a little insecure. And so it came across, and I became a little arrogant about things, because a little defensive. When we feel insecure, we feel defensive, right? And sometimes that translates as arrogance. And so for me, I didn't want to feel like I didn't know what I was doing. And so often I wouldn't take the time to listen and learn more from other people. And I deeply regret that. There were a lot of super smart, able people around me I could have learned more from. Almost 20 years later, I'm still working on that. Less so the arrogance, but the kind of asking for help and trying to, learn bit. That's it. But I'll tell you, I recently finished my master's in education, and I learned so much about leadership and organizations through that. And I wish I'd done it earlier. I wish I'd taken the deep dive into what leadership means much, much earlier. I was a very good leader. I think my staff would consider me inspiring. I've stayed in contact with almost all of them over the years. However, I learned the hard way, and it was exhausting, and it was tough, and I felt lonely. So I'm just going to say, don't wait. Don't wait like I did. Get some training, get into. It doesn't have to be formal training. We're going to talk a bit about how you can learn without even having to take a course. But I do think it's important to get formal training around leadership. And like I say, I did it the hard way, and I regret not learning it more earlier. So that's me. That was my big challenge, learned over the years. So start learning and make sure you know something about leadership to help you feel good about your own leadership. Okay, so we're going to, sorry, I'm having a little trouble with the slides. There we go. Before we dive into the questions, I would like to set the stage for what we're talking about when we say leader. Many of the questions that we got were technical related, and I understand why. I get that. But here's what happens in leadership is that we continually focus on the technical skill. We don't focus on the leadership ability. And so we're not going to do that here. We're going to focus on what it means to be a leader. Often when people have been elevated, they do have the technical skill, but then they don't have the ability to lead others and inspire them or help them learn how to be good at their own jobs. So this is my favorite quote about leadership. A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. And it's John Maxwell. And the reason I like it is it shows the three things that we need to do as leader. Often we think that as long as we know the way, everybody should just follow us, right? Or we know the way, but we don't walk that talk, or we don't go that way. And so then what happens is people feel disconnected from us because we're not modeling and this is particularly true in the nonprofit sector. We need to live out our mission in order for others to feel like they could be part of it. And then lastly, it's the shows the way. So important. We forget that bit, especially, and I'm going to say it's common in leadership, but in the nonprofit sector, there are so many things to do as a leader. We forget that our job is to teach others. It is our job. That is part of the job. So I just want to emphasize that this is how we're going to watch and pay attention to leadership today. It's broader than knowing how to fundraise. Okay. All right. So this is what we're going to focus on. So here's the next question that we got, which is, what are the most important competencies someone needs to develop to become a great nonprofit leader? So again, emphasis on develop and great. So, and competency. I mean, it's good to be competent. So we're going to look at some information that I want to share with you about that, not just about leadership, or nonprofit leadership, but also about leadership in general. So these folks, Zenger and Folkman, do they've done a lot of research with leaders and also what they call subordinates. I say people. And they compiled a big data set in which they asked, it was 332,860 bosses and peers and subordinates that contributed to this. And they were asked what, out of a list of 16, what are the top 4 competencies needed for a leader? And again, this is any sector. This is general. And the number 1 that came out was inspires and motivates others. And if you look at it, a lot of the things that actually are underneath that, because it's only 38%, but if we look at a lot of the things that actually are underneath, they actually contribute to that as well. So things like displaying high integrity, results, communication, collaboration, relationship building, championing change, all of those things are part of inspiring and motivating others. So super important for us to understand that this piece around being a great leader and an inspiring leader is not just for the nonprofit sector, it's everywhere. It is really important. And why is that? Okay, so these are some of my favorite stats, and I love looking at these because they actually help us substantiate why we're feeling so disgruntled sometimes. So there was a Gallup poll a few years ago, and I think there was one in 2017 as well, and it had similar results. Only 3 out of 10 employees feel engaged in their work. 3 out of 10, that's like less than a third. It's like, you know, if we think about it, the other 6. So often how they break it up is that, you know, there are also 3 out of 10 who feel actively disengaged. And as you can see, this is an American estimate of the productivity, but look at the lost productivity. If people are not feeling engaged in their work, it's huge. And so then if you have 3 out of 10 engaged and 3 out of 10 actively disengaged, all the folks in the middle are traveling between, on one day, okay, I feel engaged because I'm talking to quite positive people, and the next day, you know, I want to run and jump off a cliff because I'm having to talk to this person. So it's like, you know, the productivity throughout is absolutely affected by our levels of engagement. So McKinsey did a study, and they found that 70% of leaders rate themselves as inspiring and motivating. But Gallup also asked about that. And they said 82% of employees rate their leaders as fundamentally uninspiring. So one of these things does not look like the other. So it's interesting that leaders think they are inspiring and motivating, and their employees are saying, yeah, no, you're not. You're definitely not. And then this is like my favorite number, but mostly for shock value, is the 65% of employees who would forego a pay rise if it meant seeing their leader fired. They would rather give money back and get their leader out of there than it's quite substantial. And then I'm laughing, but because it's just so crazy, right? It's just insane that that's the case. But that's a lot of employees wanting their bosses gone. So that is a challenge. It's a massive challenge. So I guess what I'm saying to you is, if you're feeling a little bit lost and feeling a little bit disgruntled and feeling like leadership is a challenge, you're not alone. It's actually global, and it's not just the nonprofit sector. And it's really important that we understand that it's actually a global issue. And I attribute it in a big way to the style of leadership and to not providing or accessing training and looking at how to become a leader. So I'm going to ask you now in the question box, can you share the traits of the least inspiring leader you've ever had? Do not tell us the names, please, but just share. What are the traits? What are the things? Least inspiring.
Lianne, those are some excellent, I mean, not excellent skills, but some excellent examples coming through there. So I know that folks, you are typing in. Thank you for that. I know that you can't see each other's comments. So
okay. I can see them.
I'm
finding them too. I'm trying to find them as well. Okay,
yeah,
I got them now. Thanks, Marina.
No worries.
I'll read some out. We've got disorganized, micromanaging, controlling, narcissistic, volatile, micromanaging, trend, pettiness, negativity, resistance to change, negative, unengaged, selfish, lazy, yelled a lot. Oh, I hate hearing that. There's no reason to yell at people. Undermine your decisions, big ego, micromanaging, mostly stoned. Wow. Okay. That is another webinar, that one. Inconsistent instructions, yes. Unwillingness to engage the team, talk about behind your back, don't care. Ooh, bully, yelling, poor communication, lack of integrity. Super important as I'm reading these. Never spoke with the staff, throw you under the bus, self-centered, egotistical, blaming and accusing. I hear that a lot. And that comes under the not taking responsibility thing, right? Talks about others behind their back, favoritism, did not listen, insecure, continuous criticism, and no positive feedback. Yeah, we've got a lot of micromanaging, a lot of lack of communication, unprofessionalism. Oh, no sense of staff workload. Thank you. That's a really big one as well. Self-focused, indecision, self-interested, apathetic, arrogant, lack of ability to distribute workloads. Yeah, due to lack of trust. Okay, pay attention to that one too, lack of trust. So I'm reading all of these out, and basically what we're doing right now is doing a how not to lead, right? This is where we're at right now. Canceling meetings, rush, never have time. Oh, leaders who don't have their employees' backs. Insecure, bureaucratic. Oh, spending nonprofit money for personal things. That is hard to watch, isn't it? It's really, really tough. And never owns up or takes responsibility for team confusion, low morale, and uninspired. Really important, that one. And they all kind of link together, but it's really important in terms of, this is why we're talking about what it means to be a leader. So some of you may have a leader who is actually, maybe they're okay as people, but they just don't know how to see things. They don't know how to manage them, and they're afraid of conflict. A few more leads with no direction. Oh, you guys, thank you for sharing so much. Verbally abusive, zero. There's never a reason for that. Unaware of what's happening. Verbal abuse, lack of trust, makes you do all the work. No credit, lack of trust, abusive, blame, bullying. Wow. Hey, everybody. Oh, I'm kind of feeling a bit sad now. How about you? Like, this is, that's a lot. Okay, so again, you're not alone. And just really important, pay attention to these things. So we're talking about how people are treated, how workloads are managed, whether people are supportive, whether people are, it's really important to pay attention. So now we're on to the most, as I was reading those out, we're on to the most inspiring leaders you've ever seen. So they walk their talk, motivating, trust. So throw it in there. And you can share names if you want to. You don't have to. I just didn't want to name and shame people on a public webinar. But for some of that behavior, my goodness, I'm very sad to hear some of that. So let's look at most inspiring. And this is your to-do list, okay? If you are a leader or you're going to become a leader, remember this list. So supportive, backs the team, mentoring, inspiring, fearless, nice, coaches us, yes, willing to jump in the trenches with their staff, even if it means rolling up their sleeves, exactly, and picking up garbage, absolutely. Empowering, great communicator, backs you up, takes the time to explain things, integrity, patient, innovative, empowering, works hard, mentors others. Treat people like humans, stay connected, share the vision. Good for you. That is awesome. So that's your to-do list. Thank you, everyone. That is awesome. So we're going to talk now about the nonprofit sector, and a lot of the things you've just identified are in here. So this is a report that the Ontario Nonprofit Network had done, which is identifying the key competencies that nonprofit leaders will need in the future. And these are the 7. You can get the report. I've in the resource form we sent out, I have the link for you to the ONN.ca. And for those of you across Canada, the Ontario Nonprofit Network is kind of our umbrella organization in Ontario that kind of does advocacy, policy work, things like that. And they created this great report around leadership in the sector. So you'll be able to access that report. But you can see that actually it culminates a lot of the things you've just talked about what a great leader looks like. So a builder, a thinker, a mentor, a storyteller, an innovator, a connector, and a steward. So these are very important capacities. And if you are a leader or want to become a leader, download this report. It's kind of your roadmap to what it means. Will you be rewarded for all of these is another question. These are aspirational, and they are, you will be rewarded in terms of how you interact with others, but it's taking time for these types of roles to disseminate. As we can see from the list of negative qualities, right? We have to build this. This is what we have to build. So these are also some of the competencies of modern leadership. Communication, creative and critical thinking, self-awareness. So managing ourselves and leading others. Really important, right? We have to figure out how to lead others to do their work. That's what leadership is actually about. And so for me, this is one of the things that you need to really pay attention to if you're becoming a leader or you want to. These are the skills. So we did have a number of questions about what are the soft skills or what are the skills I can demonstrate in order to be a great leader. These are them. Many of these will not appear in the job description for an executive director. And that's pretty sad for me, because the reality is that a lot of the people we elevate are technically competent, but they're not necessarily competent in these areas. And so we need to shift it up, and we need people who can actually get other people to do their jobs well. So that's what we want to focus on when we become a nonprofit leader. Okay. So we had a lot of questions about becoming a nonprofit leader. People wanted to know what qualifications we need, how to get the opportunity, to learn the technical or administrative aspects. And you also wanted to know more about how to help others to stay engaged and passionate about the work. Just gave you a super big list of things you can do to keep people engaged. And we also gave you the list, or you crowdsourced the list of things not to do, or if you really want to disengage everybody. So in the for-profit sector, we often think that, and in other sectors, we think it's becoming a leader looks like this. We think, get a degree, you get the job, you move up. Looks like just one straight road into the mountains, right? But in the nonprofit sector, it looks more like this. We have to patch our learning together through our experience, through training, through making mistakes. In my case, a lot of mistakes. The path to leadership is not clear. And even when it seems to be, it can change quickly, because maybe if funding has been pulled and a senior leadership position you were aiming for the last 5 years, all of a sudden doesn't exist. So I'm going to use this word a lot about nonprofit leadership. It's messy. It's messy. It's not a straight line. And I guess a lot of people in other sectors would probably say the same thing, but particularly in our sector where we have so much insecurity and it's so precarious, but also because we do not have the clear path in terms of what qualifications are needed. So there is no specific qualification. A lot of you asked questions, said, what do I need? What qualification do I need? There aren't any specific. There's, so potentially for a business person, an MBA is, not always, but it's a clear sign of something. Funnily enough, though, it's changing now, right? Is that a lot of companies don't want MBAs now because they're finding the programs are too rigid. So it doesn't always stay the same either. But within our sector, there's no program that will that you have to take in order to become a leader. And a lot of when we think about it, in whether we're hiring internally for senior leadership positions or manager positions, or if a board is hiring for an executive director position, often they're focused on the tasks. They're not focused on kind of the deep dive into what's needed. So there's no correlation to qualifications, other than we're talking a lot about masters these days. And a few of you noted that. You said, okay, a lot of the positions are asking for masters. I struggle with this in terms of, and I just got my master's, so I'm talking from experience of many years of not having a master's. And the reality is that we have a lot more corporate boards coming on who may not have experience in this sector, but do feel that because in corporate a master's is now standard, there should be one. But even in some manager level positions, I've seen it. But the challenge is we don't offer the pay in our sector to justify spending thousands of dollars on postgraduate studies necessarily to kind of get ready for leadership. So, and again, we don't even know, because there's no single defining qualification, we don't know that it's the right one. So I always say, learn if you want to learn, but if you are applying for jobs and it says there's a master's, don't let it be a barrier. Apply anyway and tell them about your experience and tell them about, your volunteer work. Tell them about the things that are appropriate to the role, that show that you have the skills and competencies. So I always tell people that who are applying, never let a qualification be a barrier for you, okay? Because sometimes the folks who are, like I said, sometimes boards don't know the sector. So they're just doing their best to kind of figure out, what might be good. And then when you get there and get an interview, you're kind of like, hey, look, this is who you need. You need me because I'm good at this, this, and this. And also we need to be careful about being exclusive. This is an issue, friends. Like, this is a big issue in terms of our sector. We need to watch carefully that things like higher education attainment, there's a systemic reason a lot of people do not have it, either because of their income background or because of their cultural background. It also, for a lot of us in the sector, again, if we've spent our whole life in the sector, we may not have had the money to do a postgraduate. I'm 49 years old and I finally did my master's. I spent my life in the sector. So we want to be careful about creating exclusion for entry into leadership roles. What I'm not saying, though, is don't learn about leadership. So we want to talk about the things that you can learn about outside of the actual kind of programs. So this is one that I got asked, which is, how important, essential is it to have a background in business or finance to advance in a nonprofit? What advice would you give for emerging leaders? MSW, so that's a master's in social work, versus an MBA, master's in business administration. Neither one necessarily, both are good. So I'm sorry, I'm going to be very non-specific. It's not essential necessarily to have a background in business or finance, but it may be essential for some roles. Again, we don't have, so when I was in the UK, we had, within the nonprofit sector, we had some kind of standards around hiring, right? And that was tied to the European Union in terms of labor rights. I'm not going to say anything else about that right now. So much I could say there. But in the nonprofit sector, we did very well in terms of there were standards around hiring, there were standards around salary levels, and they were kind of like for like. If people get paid for this kind of manager level, this is generally the amount you'd get. I talk about the nonprofit sector here in Canada as the Wild West, right? We don't have anything dictating what standard it will be. And so the challenge is it's hard to get ready and to know what you will need. I once worked with, I once coached someone whose board of directors had decided that they would have an executive director role in Mississauga in Ontario for $35,000 a year full time. And for anyone living in the GTA, I mean, that's crazy. Like you can't live on that. And so, you know, for me, I was frustrated because I felt like they were not only taking advantage of a young person, but also, you know, not giving the role what it deserved in terms of its status. For, because, you know, if another board sees that someone could pay 35 grand, what's to stop them saying, oh, we could do that cheap too? Because we're not in a, it's not corporate, right? We're not, it's not the same terrain. So in terms of having that background in business or finance, again, it's okay to have it, good to have it, but you don't have to have it. You can learn on the go. But also here's the other thing, you could just apply, you could apply for 5 different jobs who ask for 5 different things. So really what I'm going to suggest is you keep your eye out for roles that match what you have already. If you want to do your MSW or you want to do your MBA, that's cool. But even with a master's in social work, let's be clear, that's a technical qualification, right? So you can lead the work, but can you lead people is another matter. So like I say, there is no particular qualification that will do all that you need it to do. We have to learn on the go. I am going to tell you about some programs though that you can access. I'm going to tell you about one in particular, just because like I say, I teach there, which is I teach at Ryerson University in Ontario, and here's a shameless plug for the nonprofit and voluntary sector management certificate program. I didn't know this existed for so long, and I was super sad that I didn't, because within Ryerson, the reason I like Ryerson is it gives some practical learning. So they do teach, there are programs around courses in financial management, in evaluation. I personally teach understanding the nonprofit sector, which, wow, did that ever help me? I highly recommend it for those of you who are looking around going, this sector makes no sense to me, which might be a lot of you. It's very, very useful in terms of getting an understanding of the history. I also teach leadership and developing effective organizations. So there's marketing, there's diversity, there's a bunch of practical programs, but there's also great programs at Seneca and at Carleton. There's a master's program in nonprofit leadership. And then there are other programs across the country. In the resources, again, there's a link to a higher, I think, Canadian universities page that will tell you what programs are there. So just to let you know, there are formal programs out there if you want them. And I'm not saying don't access them, but again, just don't expect them to appear necessarily on the job description. These are for you to feel competent and confident. They will help you in your applications, but be sure to look for what you want to learn, not just what looks good on a resume. Okay, so that leads me into more informal learning. This was a question asked over and over again, and it is, how do I learn to be a leader if I don't have the chance to do the work through my job and no one wants to or is available to teach me? Big question, and it's a major issue, especially for aspiring leaders who, you know, there's a vacuum between how do I get up there? Like I want to get there, but you know, I don't get a chance to look at, I don't even know what my budget is. So how can I learn how to manage money if they won't even let me know how much, you know, if I can't even manage the, you know, the $1,000 budget I have for my program. So this is real. And again, you're not alone. It's different in each organization. Some organization, we'll talk a little bit later about distributed leadership, which is a new model that I'm advocating to help the sector be more future-proofed. But this is a really important part. We often we don't necessarily teach either, right? EDs don't necessarily spend the time showing others how to do the job. I'm too busy. I get it. We're all busy. It's true. But I guess my challenge to current leaders is it's also your job to teach. That's the job of a leader, is to show the way. Remember, show the way. So for those of you who are not executive directors, and for those of us who are, this is hard to admit, but for those of you who aren't, what you might not know is that there's often a deep insecurity for a lot of us. I talked to you about it at the top, introducing myself, right? And when I felt insecure because I didn't feel like I knew stuff. I didn't feel like I knew and so then I would be defensive out externally. I wouldn't listen, right? Executive people, not just executive people, deal with their own insecurities in different ways, which is why, not an excuse, but it leads to some of that stuff around the abusive stuff or the not engaging with staff and not being able to kind of lead you, is partly because a lot of times we've grown ourselves up. We, executive directors and CEOs in the sector, have had to figure it out along the way, and there is a deep worry for all of us that we may not know what we're doing. And so then if you think about it, if we're supposed to be teaching someone, it's exposing, right? So I'll give you a quick example. When I was, it took me a couple years to figure out how to read a balance sheet. And a balance sheet is just basically a statement of your assets and liabilities and your capital. And it basically gives you the financial health of your organization, but I had no idea how to read one. And so the challenge for me then was I felt vulnerable in saying it to my board. So I just kind of pretended that I knew how for a couple of years before I really learned it. Now I was good at budgeting. And then what I also did, and this is what people who can't read do, right? This is what we do in all sorts of literacy, is we find something that can give us a clue. So I would look for the right numbers. I'd figured it out that those are the numbers I need to pay attention to. And so I would be able to kind of go, okay, are we in good shape? I could tell by the numbers. So I figured it out. But I still would not want to teach that to anybody, because that would not, I don't know that how I've learned to read a balance sheet after 15 years as an executive director is the right way to teach someone. So just bear in mind that it's not personal. It's not about you. Often it's about us as leaders. I can't tell you what the answer is to that if you do have an insecure leader who's challenged by it. But what I can share with you are some ways that you can manage it yourself or help your organization to manage it. So you can have stretch opportunities. By that, I mean creating action groups. I always say try not to have committees, because committees are often talking shops and they're about consensus. They're not necessarily about leadership. People are kind of like wary of committees, but you can be a committee, a chair of a committee or something. Even do my goodness, if they're looking for somebody to be the health and safety rep, do it, step up, right? It's my least favorite thing, but I stepped up and did it once because I just wanted to be able to be in a position where they could see that I wanted to take on more responsibility. Plus I wanted to learn how. Cross-function learning in organizations, it's important to have ways of learning different things. So you may not be able to manage your budget, but you may be able to learn from the finance person how to run a budget. And so in organizations, if we can build some ways that people can learn across functioning, same with marketing and frontline services, it helps everybody to develop their skills. Mentoring, obviously it's important. One thing I would say for people if they're looking to become an executive director or a senior leader of any kind is applying to work in a small nonprofit. If you work in a small nonprofit, you get the full experience of everything. Doesn't mean you get any sleep. I worked in small nonprofits for my entire career, but it is if you want to touch things and be able to jump in and be able to get your hands on the budget, your hands on project management, all of those things, a small nonprofit is a good place to do that. If you are in a small nonprofit and there's nowhere to go, a sideways move to a larger organization. So sometimes we think we just have to keep going up the ladder, but the reality is that if you want to do a sideways move to a larger organization, then you can kind of see the ladder, right? There's a ladder. In a small nonprofit, there's no ladder. So sometimes I've said that, even I had an executive director ask that and say, I'm kind of, I've run my small, where do I go? And so I say, go be a director in a larger organization. You may not get to be an executive director or CEO, but do the sideways and then grow and elevate later. Staying updated on trends, articles, blogs, leadership courses and programs, leadership books and podcasts. I know you're saying right now going, I don't have time for that. Make time. Make time. This is your learning. It's your career and it's important for you to keep up to date with what's happening outside. And these are ways you can elevate, you know what language to talk, you know what things to say in an interview. So this was a common one which people would say, which is I am now a leader and or I want to become a leader. My manager's not telling me how to do stuff. And this is my main thing that I say to people a lot, which is sink or swim is not a leadership theory. It's kind of bizarre that we think that people should just be able to figure it out. And part of it is, like I said before, a lot of our senior leaders, that's what they had to do. But it is not the most efficient or effective way of growing leadership. And in fact, it is quite wasteful, partly because as people learn it along the way, who are they learning it from? They're learning it from people who didn't learn it, from proper sources and have had to make it up potentially, and or who don't know how to be a leader. And so what we do is we create this constant cycle of people who are not equipped and able to actually be leaders in our sector. So it's really important that we don't, as a sector, continue to think that this is how leadership works. It isn't, and it is how it might currently work, but it's not the best way. So lastly, we had a number of questions asking, should I volunteer? Should I be on a board or volunteer in a leadership capacity? And my answer is yes, yes, yes. However, just be aware, a lot of organizations don't offer leadership positions as volunteering roles. We're still very much in, sadly, we're not doing that well with skilled volunteers often. What we tend to do is the administrative positions. I say that having run several volunteer centers. But look for an organization, or maybe you know somebody in an organization. You could say, you know what, I would really like to learn more about this. Could I volunteer for your organization? Like, small organizations need people all the time. So step up and put yourself forward. And being on a board, absolutely. But be aware, it's a big responsibility, and we do not need more board members who are just there for the resume. So please only do it if you care about the cause. It's not just about you, right? It's about the organization. So if you care about the cause, go for it. Okay, so now we're going to move into, I'm just moving along quickly because I want to make sure we get to all the questions you've asked. When you become a new leader, so this is for all of you who said, okay, I'm here now. What are we doing? What do I do? When you become, and there's a lot of questions, there's so many things to learn about. Again, it's very different in the nonprofit sector because we have to touch all the functions. When you go into a big corporation, they have an HR department, a marketing department. Even the bigger nonprofits have fundraising department, like you have departments, whereas often as a new leader, you're it. So, or you're it in an organization where everybody's just keeping going. So just be aware that when you become a new leader, you just have to figure things out along the way. And like I said, it's messy. Be compassionate with yourself about not knowing things, because as we just talked a lot about, you probably didn't have an opportunity to learn the stuff. This is your opportunity. So it's important to be committed to learning. And for the ED and CEO role, again, I had a few questions about should we be a generalist or should we be a specialist? And what that means is, should I know about a lot of things or should I know about one thing? And generally, you want to be a generalist in this work because you're going to, like I say, touch a lot of different things. Specialist is fine, but again, like I've talked about earlier, is that just because you're a specialist in a particular thing won't necessarily make you a good leader. You might be a specialist technically, but you need to lead people. Okay, so this is another question that we had. People and issues management seem to take up a lot of my time instead of doing the work I set out to do. How do you navigate that? Managing people and reaching your own targets. So my cheeky answer is people and issues management is your job as a leader. That's what you're meant to do. We have this funny thing that we've created where we've gone, somehow the people that keep talking to me are extra and I have my own work to do and they are bothering me. And I'm going to just say that's your role. Like when you become a manager or a leader, it's your job to actually deal with the people and the issues. Now, I do take the point of the question though, that sometimes those things can be taking over and you're struggling with it and trying to do both. And so then you're there, you know, deal with people all day, and then you're there at night trying to get the rest of the work that you're supposed to get done. Two things for that. One is organizations. Can we please start realizing that leadership is actually something that takes time? So not overpile things onto managers that mean that they can't look after their people well. And then secondly, boundaries are really important, both in terms of if you're a middle manager and trying to kind of manage that, but also in terms of your people. So I was recently coaching somebody, and we were talking a lot about, you know, approachability and what does that mean, and is it the same as availability? And we just talked about, you know, if you have your own office, then closing your door does not mean you're not approachable. It does mean you're not available right now. And so even if you're in an open plan office, you can have visual clues, like a little sign that says, not available now, come back later, or just friendly things saying, I need to focus right now. So the balancing between being a kind of an open door kind of leader and somebody who gets stuff done is ever moving, but boundaries will help you. And also communicating with your staff, helping your staff to understand that you have other things you need. You've got a fundraising proposal to do and it's due tomorrow. So guess what? I hear that you got stuff going on. Can you wait until tomorrow? You can always tell people to wait. It's okay. It's okay, unless it's an emergency. But even then, you know, sometimes people can go away and figure things out themselves. So as I mentioned earlier, I wasn't very good at this, still struggle with it, but I can still, what is that? You do as you can and teach. I forget what the saying is, but anyway, I'm getting better at it. I'm getting better at it. Ask for help. We need to get over ourselves, right? We need to get over the fact that we think that we're supposed to know everything. And so we need to be able to identify people early on who can help us. And sometimes that's a partner, sometimes that might be another manager that we kind of grew up with in a different organization or the same, but find your buddy. Identify who in your organization is somebody you can ask questions of. Get friendly with your finance person or your treasurer. They're your best buddies, because you don't always have to know everything. I mean, that's why I did okay. I kind of relied on people who knew what they were doing in financial areas. I mean, I'm good at it, but the balance sheet still, you know. But the point is that we get worried about looking like we don't know what we're doing, but the reality is we don't know what we're doing. When you become a new leader, it's just the way it is. And so that's okay. That's okay. So find people around who can help. And the other part of it is that if you need to get some external support, like a coach or go on a training course, advocate for yourself with your board or with your senior manager and say, look, I'm a new leader. I want to do my very best job here. I need some support. I need to learn something. I need to learn some stuff. Coaching, I particularly provide coaching for new leaders for this exact reason, because do you know in the first 6 months when you become a leader, it's more people lose their jobs in the first 6 months than any other time in their leadership role. And it's because we do not help people manage the transition well. And it's particularly the case in the nonprofit sector, because in the for-profit sector, there's a whole thing called onboarding, which means helping people get acquainted with the role, the organization, the terrain, and we do not do that well here. We do not do it well, particularly for executive directors either, because a lot of times the board is not from the sector, so they don't know, right? And they're busy people too. So again, it's not just you. This is a major trend in any sector, that being a new leader is very tough in the first 6 months. Get yourself some help. Now, you may not want to ask your board directly for some help, because it depends on your board. You want to be careful. Just see what they're like, because sometimes boards can think you maybe don't know what you're doing. And yes, I just said you don't know what you're doing, but sometimes your board thinking that you don't know what you're doing is different from you trying to acknowledge you have some learning to do. So just see who's on your board, but otherwise, like I say, advocate for yourself to get some support. Okay, so here are some messages from current leaders. I'm going to just let you read those. This is coming out to you through a PDF, but I want you to, so I put a bunch on here so that you have them. We had some lovely messages around mentoring, networking, curiosity, understanding expectations, listening, brag, yes, celebrate, be prepared for change, be prepared to step up in any job. Yeah, you know what, when you become a leader, especially in a small nonprofit, I built a community hub a few years ago, and I have to tell you, there's nothing more humbling than building a community hub, because often we couldn't afford to have somebody maintaining, so it was often me changing the toilet paper. And so, you know, I had all these 21 organizations coming to me when we ran out of toilet paper. So that was not the best use of my time and not a good example. But anyway, just to let you know, it just happens, right? And there will always be unfinished work. So get comfortable with not getting stuff done. And I love this. Lift as you climb. Empower the staff around you to learn and grow. Super important. Okay, very briefly, I'm going to talk to you about the future. The question was, what is the state of succession planning in the nonprofit sector? And for those of you who aren't sure what succession planning is, it's actually a thing where organizations start planning the succession of either the senior leaders and or other layers of leaders in the organization. You can probably understand why it's not so good in our sector. We just don't have the resources for it. However, I know, I wanted to say something else about that. Sorry. The other reason it's challenging is because it's a very transient sector. And so basically we are, it's tough to actually identify a new leader 5 years out, right? And so we're also not investing in the next generation, as we've just talked about. There's no investment of the pipeline of leaders as a sector or within organizations, which is problematic. And the other thing with succession is that it tends to focus on the role, like in the ED or CEO. And I've done a lot of succession work over the years, and I find that EDs say, oh, I told my board, I was trying to introduce succession planning with my board, and they think I'm leaving now. So, you know, it can actually put you in a very vulnerable position, especially with a board that isn't familiar with organizational development or leadership stuff, right? So it's actually creates some vulnerability. So I've taken all that I've learned and created a new model, and I'm only going to show you this very briefly. I've sent you some information, but just to show you there is a way of doing things differently. So when I talk about future proofing, I talk about building a house of bricks, and that's based on the Three Little Pigs story, right? You don't want to build a house of hay, you don't want to build a house of straw, you want a house of bricks that stays. Doesn't mean not being adaptable. And so this is the 3 pillars. These are the 3 pillars that I've come up with that are, you know, important for creating a strong organization that stays. So fortify, and that's where the distributed leadership is, and learning. Diversify. We need to become more diverse with our ideas, with our people. And amplify is communication, collaboration, grow presence. So I'll just briefly, again, you'll get the slides, you can read it. I don't want to take up all the time for this, but it's just to give you a glimpse of how it can be different. So fortifying is really that decision making is distributed. Why can't you as a project manager have control of $1,000 budget? Like, that is not a big risk for the organization, and it's good learning. So if we can disseminate decision making, it will give you opportunities to learn. And then if we embrace learning from failure and evaluation, it makes a big difference. Same with diversifying. For those of you who are people of color, you know what I speak of when I say, you know, you walk into the room of any senior leadership group in the sector and you will find a very homogenous group. It's a very white group. I'm just calling it out loud, often gender-based too. So just be really clear that there is a lot of good firm evidence that actually it's organizations that have a good focus on diversity, not just with everything, gender, culture, but also ideas and personalities. They are the ones that stay strong, and they benefit from creativity and innovation. And then amplify. So this is about sharing that impact internally. We forget to help people understand that they're on mission. Cross-departmental collaboration, cross-sector partnerships, all ways that people can actually step up and become leaders. Okay, so you're gonna get, I'll take this away. We asked you what you do with your magic wand. You all know what we need to do. You know what we need to change. So these are a lot of the things that you've put forward, but you know, if you're going to become a leader, think about how you're going to do it differently. So here's my challenge to you. What one thing will you commit to doing to improve your own leadership? So when you're done the webinar, before you go and do something else, just sit down and write your one thing, and I'm happy for you to share it with me. You've got my email address, you've got probably my Twitter feed, I'm on LinkedIn, but commit to one thing, because we have to get better at leadership in the sector. Okay, so, and there's my program, you get the slide, and now we're moving on to the question time.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lianne. This has been quite an eye-opening session.
Sorry, I know I threw a lot of content at everybody just there.
I'm going to just quickly remind everybody we are on the top of the hour, and I do recognize that. So if you need to jump, we are recording the question period. So just go ahead, and you can always catch up on the recording later. We'll send that out later today. Thanks for joining us. And for those of you that are off, hope you have a good rest of the day. For those of you that can stay, feel free to pop your questions into the question box, and we'd be happy to answer what we can. Lianne, let's start off with a question that's come in about managing multiple generations. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, yes, great question. Okay, so one of the things, the myths in leadership I think we have right now is that millennials, and I say air quote millennials because there's such a bad rap for, I mean, this poor next generation. But you know what, I'm going to say too that we do it every generation gets labeled. If we think about, you know, how did the people in the 60s get labeled, right? But we have a particular thing right now, which is can have up to 5 generations in the workplace. So when we talk about millennials, we talk about often what we say about millennials is that they're demanding, you know, the idea is that they're entitled and that they're wanting to do different jobs, and whatever the truth of that is for some individuals, the reality is every single person of every generation wants to feel like their time is being utilized effectively. They want to feel that they are contributing to something bigger, and they want to feel like they're, especially if they're working in the nonprofit sector, like they're making a difference. And so we have more similarities across the generations than we do have differences. There are definitely some differences in terms of how people operate. You know, so again, a generalization is the boomer style of leadership is kind of rubbing up against the style of millennials who want to have more leadership opportunities. And then next gen leaders like me are saying, yeah, we're pretty invisible. Nobody's even talking to us. So there's a lot going on. So I would say focus on the similarities, acknowledge the differences. Again, try not to generalize, and work with people where they're at as individuals. Really, really important. The other thing that I have a blog for it, which I can't remember the link, the title, but I have a blog for our deal with it. And you know what is a really effective tool is storytelling, story sharing amongst the generations, is creating opportunities for them to bond through story. It's a really useful tool.
That's great. Thanks, Lianne. That's something that comes up so often, is that really, you know, we focus so much on the differences between the generations, but when it comes to good management, most of us want the same thing, don't we?
Yes, you bet. We want to be valued. We want to be valued. It's massive.
Oh, that's great. Okay, moving on. Tanya asks, in terms of time, how much do we spend investing in ourselves versus getting the work done, looking at formal education, finding a mentor, and or volunteering? It's a pretty big list.
Could you read that again?
Yes, sorry. In terms of time, yep. So how much time do we spend investing in ourselves versus getting the work done? So looking at formal education, finding a mentor, volunteering, you know, a lot of stuff to juggle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I guess what I would say is it's a very vague answer, but it depends. The reality is that there's an ebb and flow of activity often in nonprofits, right? You have a year end, you have the end of a program, you have a lot of things. So I would say that what you're wanting to do is just be mindful about how you're treating your time. So I don't think there's a formula. I think it's more about what do I need? And that's the thing about the self-awareness and self-reflection. So I always talk about self-awareness is to knowing what it's about, knowing what you need to look after yourself. And self-reflection is tapping into when you need to, right? It's giving yourself the time. I tell people to spend at least 15 minutes a day in self-reflection, whether it's at their, out in the park or in the parking lot or at their desk or whatever, wherever they want, just close your eyes, but just have 15 minutes during, say, the middle of the day or the end of the day. Middle of the day is good because what you're doing is you're saying, where am I at? How am I doing? What do I need for the rest of the day? I think that your educational reality is a lot of the educational pursuits are done outside of work. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's fair that when organizations don't give time back, but there may be times in your life that you're willing to invest. So try to get the time back for, like, if you're trying to do something to advance in that organization, try and ask for some time for either, generally what I would ask for is like time to attend and a bit of time to study, right? And so then what you're doing is you're negotiating for what you really want. And then you can say, okay, well, at least give me time to attend. I'll study on my own time, right? So just continual negotiation with yourself and with others to give yourself some headspace and learning space.
Wonderful. Now, at the very beginning of the webinar today, you told your story about stepping into a leadership position quite young, and you mentioned perhaps it was difficult for you to be taken seriously there. We've had a few questions coming in about others that maybe are in similar situations, and they're wondering, how do you get around that feeling of not being taken seriously?
Yeah, great question. I would say that the first one is, and I've done a lot of writing about this, is recognizing that there's something that we experience called imposter syndrome. So when you become a new leader, or when you stretch yourself into something, there's a whole sense of not feeling good enough, not feeling like you should be there. And so then we turn that lens on how we look at the rest of the world, and we may be interpreting. I interpreted a lot that I wasn't being taken seriously. And actually, sometimes if I reacted too quickly or I wouldn't listen, that's when I wasn't being taken, like then I would kind of bring it on, right? Because that's when you go, oh, well, she's young. So in actual fact, the behavior that it rolls out as sometimes engenders the thing that you thought was happening. Because in actual fact, it was really interesting. I was doing youth work, and I still remember where I figured out that I was not quite right, or that I shouldn't generalize with everybody around me, is I was sitting at a table there was a Russell Commission, which was a national commission on youth action and engagement. And I was sitting there with the CEO of Barclays Bank and the man named Russell, who was actually from Scottish Power, like these massive big CEOs, and they would lean forward and listen to me when I spoke, because I was the one who could talk about the youth experience. I could talk about the experience of youth in areas of poverty. I was the expert, and they were listening to me because I was the expert on that. I mean, truthfully, the young people were the expert, but they had taught me enough that I could speak at that table. So sometimes we're imagining it, and so we have to be super clear that might be the case. And then if we're not imagining it and it's true, just keep going and do your best work. That's all you just do, just keep speaking up at the table. At some point, something you say, if someone's kind of like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about or whatever, they will hear you and they'll understand that you're speaking with experience and you know what you're doing. But like I said, you may not know what you're doing. So also saying I don't know is a sign of maturity. So we all need to be able to say it.
That's a good lesson, Lianne. Here's a great question also from Lauren. Lauren is asking, how do you balance being professional, but also being yourself and showing your personality? So as a leader, should we be holding back a little?
Wonderful question. Thank you for asking that. In actual fact, in my work that I do, in my Leadership Leap and other work, is I actually help people discover who they are as leaders. You could ask a bunch of leadership coaches this question, or leadership trainers this question, they'll have different answers. And what I will, from my perspective, this idea of being professional has restricted us in how we treat people. We have bought a line that tells us that we somehow need to be not human in order to be taken seriously as a leader. And I just saw somebody has written down that they've been reading Brené Brown's Dare to Lead book. Thank you. Absolutely. If you follow some of the new leadership thought, like Brené Brown, highly recommend. On Netflix, she's got a show. Watch it, please. She talks about shame and vulnerability. She's doing a lot of leadership work. And the reason I refer to her is because there are a few leadership thinkers out there who are now helping us understand how to be ourselves and connect with people. So we need to be ourselves to be empathetic. We need ourselves to be ourselves to care. It's okay to care about the people. So I personally feel that you can hold back, air quotes, when, you know, in instances, there are moments like if you're dealing with a funder, or maybe if you're letting someone go, or there are a number of instances where you need to just be straight and not bring your personality in and just be quite clear and clean. And but there aren't that many of those situations. And I'm not saying we swing the other way where we bring in our moods and we're abusive and like all the stuff that people were talking about at the beginning, but we need to find a space where we can be ourselves, because the people who are themselves, and if we looked at that list again of the inspiring leaders, that tells us that people want to feel connected. The non-inspiring leaders are the ones that hold themselves back and don't interact, don't share anything of themselves. So it's important to be you, but it's also important to figure out who you are as a leader, right? In the role. That's a journey. I wrote an article for CharityVillage. One of the articles for this series is around becoming. And I love the concept of becoming, because it just tells you you're always becoming, you're always moving into being a leader. It's a journey. There's no end point, but you have to be you along the way. Sorry, I could go on about that for quite some time. That was a very long answer.
Oh, that's great, Lianne. And I think Lauren is thankful to get that question answered. So that's great. And I'm going to pop that link actually to that Becoming a Leader article that you had done into the chat box, because I think
Thank you.
some folks might want to see that. So I'm just going to
And I also did an imposter syndrome one in this series.
Yes, and I did share that one as well.
Oh, great.
In
Perfect.
the chat
Thanks.
box. So hopefully folks have access to that too.
Yeah. So go back and read those, because they're quite this is the culmination of those articles. So and feel free to connect with me about any of the ideas put forward.
Excellent. And I'm glad that someone finished off our Q&A session there with a reference to Brené Brown too, because
thank you.
I'm a big fan of hers as well. And I think this new leadership style that we have is bringing a lot of good stuff that's much needed. So
for sure.
So with that, I think we're going to finish off for today. I'm conscious of the fact that we are over time, and I'm thankful to all of you who stuck around for the Q&A. Thanks for hanging on there. And we are going to be following up with you later this afternoon, most likely. We'll have the webinar recording. We're going to have the slide deck. So all of those slides that you saw today, you'll have a PDF version of that. And we've got a bunch of resources that Lianne has so kindly put together and shared, including her ebook. I don't know if you want to just mention to folks about that, Lianne?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. I put together an ebook. You'll recognize some of the stories, but again, it's a series of stories and blogs and things, and it's just a gift to you. Thank you for coming along, and I hope it's helpful.
Wonderful. And there'll be some links there as well to our past webinar recordings. And I do recommend that if you have questions about leadership and coaching and management, check those out. We have probably over 70 in our library, and they're everything from very technical in terms of how to read financial statements. Lianne, maybe you would have found that helpful as
I would have.
Yes. But we also have great stuff on inspiring your team and giving feedback that's motivating and professional. So lots of really great topics there that are certainly linked to leadership themes, and those are all free. So go check those out. When we reach out to you later today, there's going to be a survey as well. We ask that you fill that out if you can. That'll help us see if there's other topics you'd like to see covered in a future session. And because this was a bit of a new experiment for us in terms of doing an Ask Me Anything session, you can let us know what you thought about that as well, and if you'd like to see more. We mentioned earlier, we're finishing off our webinar series for new nonprofit leaders next week, June 20th, with a presentation where Matt Fulbrook is going to be discussing what to expect when joining a board of directors for the first time. So if you are thinking about taking that next step as a volunteer and joining a board, you're really going to want to check out that session. We'll have a link to register in the email that you'll get later today. So with that, I want to thank you, Lianne, for a great presentation. Any final words for everyone?
Yes, well, thank you to Marina, and thanks CharityVillage for having me again. And I want to say a big thank you to everybody who attended and who gave questions in the survey, but also during the actual webinar. This was a brand new thing for all of us, and it was super fun. So thank you, everyone. And I just have to say that I am inspired myself. We have some amazing people wanting to get into leadership or are now in leadership. And so I feel much better about the nonprofit sector today.
That's awesome. That's such a great way to end the session. Good. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.